Hello and welcome to episode 86. Today we are going to focus on Nintendo's big gamble from the mid-2000s, the company's revisit to a dual-screened, clamshelled handheld, that this time around, they called, the Nintendo DS. It was first offered for sale November 21, 2004, and as a series, the Nintendo DS sold an incredible 154 million units worldwide. But before we get into the details, I'd like to briefly look back to our photo quiz question from episode 85, and reveal what it really was, and, more importantly, which of you guys knew it. So, which of you out there got it right this time around? Let's take a look. I see 3 viewers whose answers are correct. It was indeed the 3DS, with the decal of a highly stylized Nintendo Entertainment System controller, stenciled on its outer shell. And siding with Cool FX here, it was a little difficult to love this limited edition. Kinda felt a little lazy on Nintendo's behalf. But anyway, congratulations to each of you, and a sincere well done for getting it right. At the tail end of 2003, and into early 2004, it would be fair to say that Nintendo was not in a great place. The 2001 GameCube was underperforming, at least on its initial expectations, and while the Game Boy Advance SP was doing relatively well, the rise of a credible competition threat, and the pace of technology in the handheld arena, meant things looked bleak at headquarters. And I might well be in the minority here, but I simply love all the speculation surrounding what a new system might just look like, the detailed lists of its required specifications, and its must-have functions. And honestly, while these concept art rendered visuals are notoriously wrong time and again, causing all sorts of online frustration, I simply adore the possibilities these fantasies conjure up. Then we get the release of the actual specifications, as outlined by the company, usually with no imagery or exact release dates. These second phase mock-ups are often closer to the actual release model, but can look, at least with hindsight, like they're from some parallel universe. It took until the presentation at the E3 in 2004 to get a true picture of what we might actually be getting, literally as a possible release product, just a few months later, from Nintendo's presentation staff. The problems with Nintendo's spiraling sales decline was keenly obvious, and the products they had were being heavily discounted to maintain any credence of sales growth, and even doommongers were going as far as to suggest this was the end for Nintendo. So it is not an understatement to suggest that a new and dynamic handheld was both needed and essential before the year's end. Oh dearie me, but that's the wrong style of new. We'll get to that in a later episode. For now, we got to see what was shown here, a dual-screen, clamshell design that actually looked quite appealing, and is confirmed to be the Nintendo DS, and not the pre-production code name that was given to it, the Nitro. And while we wouldn't know it at the time, several key features of this pre-production model of the DS would be changed in a very short period of time, likely to help make it appear more upmarket, and less toy-like, especially considering the competition had gone all in on attempting to dethrone the once mighty Nintendo. Sony's PlayStation Portable was in development at the same time as the DS, and it would go on to be first released December 2004, and both on paper and eventually in the flesh it was a stunningly beautiful knockout, and a knockout that frightened the likes of Nintendo deeply. And sadly that's where you'll find a lot of reviewers will leave the subject of competition, but I know it's not true, as I was there and living this experience. The other challenges were to be found with the growing popularity of PDAs, or personal digital assistants, which were booming, and honestly really eating into Nintendo's sales. I had one from Dell, and still own it. They were much more like what you'd expect from a modern smartphone, than the simpler folding cell phones of that era. These colored touchscreen devices were equipped with a self-contained stylus. They were really amazing, obviously wireless, with usable word processors. They sunk the iconic file of Fax dead in the water, with its interactive calendars, and yes, it had a ton of fun to play games. And although the PDAs mentioned here were a real and present threat to Nintendo in the period of early to mid-2004, we cannot discount the fact that Nintendo were highly likely aware of the other looming threat to their dominance, with that stemming from the rise of the cell phone. I'm sure they were following its development trajectory and the additional market share they were likely to steal away from Nintendo in a mere matter of years. So what influences actually led to the production version of the DS that we finally got to purchase? The most likely answer you'll get to this question will be the Game Boy Advance SP, as it was contemporary with the DS, and it was also a clamshell design. It would even go on to share the SP's hinge setup. So for sure, the Game Boy SP was a clear influence for the production version of the Nintendo DS. But Nintendo had already produced a series of dual-screen, clamshelled handhelds way back in the 80s. These earlier devices have so much in common with the DS that it would be negligent to not credit them with the influence they clearly contributed. These were the multi-screen range of the iconic Game & Watch series which we've already covered here on our channel. Of course others noticed this reference from the very beginning, with some enthusiasts making mock-up versions of the original Nintendo DS, to reflect the earlier Game & Watches, achieving this with the use of special decals and amazing paint jobs. So if we go back to the E3 presentation in 2004, the question that must have been floating around in Nintendo's corporate heads, was simply this: is this good enough? Well, the design of the pre-production prototype was fashioned to appeal to a slightly older audience than Nintendo currently reaches with the SP. The DS has continued to evolve, and will include both local area network capability, allowing for things like chat rooms, and local wireless multiplayer game functionality. You will also have access to all normal Wi-Fi wireless capabilities when online. The lower of two screens will act as a touchscreen, which will be used in conjunction with a stylus or fingertip. Looking just a year after the Nintendo DS was launched, so in 2005, we somewhat surprisingly received two new Game Boy Advance models. One, the all-metal Game Boy, the Micro, and the Game Boy Advance SP with the super bright screen, the AGS-101. So, Nintendo went firm on a final release model of the Nintendo DS, and it hit the shelves in late November 2004, just in time for the holiday peak sales period. The final model design being shown here on the right-hand side. So with the DS released, let's quickly look through the instruction booklet to see its actual specifications and capabilities, just for the record. As we flick through the various pages, I'll summarize some key features. Please feel free to pause the video for a more in-depth look at anything you find interesting. But for now, let's just confirm the already known major design feature, and that is that the Nintendo DS employs an innovative dual-screen system that is also microphone-enabled for gameplay. The system also boots up without any real load times, and the screen operates on a slightly higher resolution of display. Other than the Game Boy Advance SP that was available during the DS's launch, the crowning achievement being, it remains fully backward compatible with all the older GBA games, and as the SP is still a current console, any future games too. The inclusion of local Wi-Fi multiplayer capabilities, and a touchscreen allows for a growing list of original and fun game options, utilizing map packs and setups. With the Metroid demo game leading the way, this originality is the genuine value added, that you can't play on any other system. Ultimately, it's not really the hardware but the quality and diversity of the software that really sells a system. And the Nintendo DS was lucky enough to be launched with some very familiar franchises, including a new Metroid game we've mentioned. There was also a revised Mario 64 and WarioWare, both of which have been a significant hits for the company, on the Game Boy and the GameCube previously. It's likely well known that Nintendo has long held a dominant position in the handheld gaming space. Since 1989, it has sold more than 168 million Game Boy units worldwide, and has outlasted several competing products, many technically superior, from companies such as Atari, SNK and Sega. The introduction of Sony's new PSP to the field was seen as Nintendo's stiffest competition to date. The DS received a lucky head start of several months, including the holiday period from 2004, which we've previously touched upon, but Sony, at least in the North American market, could not launch its new flagship handheld until February 2005. The reason given by Sony for quietly delaying the North American launch of the PSP was to blame a lack of software. This played into Nintendo's hands. Widely seen by many at the time as a counter to the PSP, and other emerging games technologies, the DS would never have the same power as its primary competitor. While it focuses on its own strengths, by offering a unique new way to play familiar games, it would only have slightly more processing power than the Nintendo 64 console, which was released 8 years before the DS system. Sony, meanwhile, has been touting the PSP as having capabilities that are nearly on par with the PlayStation 2, that had damaged Nintendo's home console business so badly. They clearly hope to scoop up the mobile gaming title as well. With the Sony PSP's power issues, as in its poor battery life, starting to become a rather well-known concern, the Nintendo DS scored yet another win. Its battery life was little short of amazing, and took on particular importance in the decision-making process. Though Sony's handheld has true video and music playback capabilities that the DS does not, most gamers felt that the iPod, launched in 2001, and other MP3 players better dealt with those concerns. So in retrospect, did the slightly rushed and quirky Nintendo DS help save Nintendo way back in 2004? The answer is clearly, an emphatic yes. The Christmas period saw 2.8 million units sold worldwide. That was a staggering 800,000 more than even Nintendo expected as their best estimates, likened by some in the industry to the later phenomenon known as Tickle Me Elmo, meaning the most sought-after holiday gift. The Nintendo DS was an outstanding success. Of course it needed slimming down and tuning up, but that's another story, for another time. And that sadly brings us to our traditional photo quiz question segment, where I offer up a partial picture of a random Nintendo item, and see if you guys can guess what it is. So what in the world Do you know? As always, feel free to drop a guess into the comments section. I'll give it a week or so, then I'll add a reveal photo to show you what it actually was. But for now, there's nothing left to say except, thank you all for watching, and, I'm going to take a break from any new videos for a while. However, I hope to return to pick up where we've left off, at some later date. Thank you all for your support, take care and stay safe.